Welcome back. We're now into a special election edition of tonight's Hot Seat. We are joined by our political analysts, our faithful political analysts who are with us all throughout this election season. We're talking about Dr. Silas Lee and Dr. Ed Chervenak, giving us the latest on what we've seen in the last 24 hours when it comes to these election results that we were watching so closely. Gentlemen, thank you again for joining us.
You're welcome.
So let's start with, instead of the races, let's talk about the voter turnout. We were just talking about it. The fact that across the board we saw less than 30% when it comes to voters turning out for this race, for the races on the ballot. Give your thoughts on that. And that was something that we were talking about prior to Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean, most of the people who follow elections figured it was going to be about 25 to 30%. And a lot of it was due to the fact that because of Hurricane Ida, that, people kind of got in the disequilibrium and, they're dealing with fixing up their homes, getting their businesses back online. And so they're not really focused on politics. People aren't typically focused on politics, and even more so this time around. And at the same time that Ida hits, at the very time that campaigns are going to begin their effort, it's basically Labor Day is kind of the tripping point. And so they just never were able to regain that momentum and engage people. And I think that's one of the big reasons why we saw such low turnout.
Yeah, because we definitely saw more signs, yard signs, than we saw the candidates on the streets kind of getting out and trying to get that vote out. Dr. Lee, you pointed out the history behind the significance between a significant hurricane or storm season and election season.
Yeah, it was a traumatic event in terms of, one, voters being displaced. And what I noticed in the polls I conducted pre-Ida, there was more enthusiasm, a little bit more motivation. Post-Ida, there was a hyper acceleration of frustration, anxiety, and fatigue. And that's what Ida did, is sort of galvanize and put some fuel to the fire in reference to voters feeling like they needed change or they wanted to express their frustration in some way. In some way, it galvanized a voter rebellion against some candidates. So that's what we saw with this election. And another reality is that since the late 90s, I've observed a significant decline in voter participation. Mark Morial was reelected with 119,000 votes. Then after that, we noticed it was 90,000 votes in reference to some other runoff elections. In this particular case, it was down to 75,000 votes. So each runoff cycle with mayors and citywide races, it looks like it contributes to a decline in voter participation. But we cannot ignore the impact and the significance of Hurricane Ida.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with, you just mentioned the mayor. Let's talk about one of the biggest races of the night, New Orleans mayoral race. The incumbent had a strong forecast to get reelected prior to Saturday night. History shows in New Orleans that most incumbents, they get reelected fairly easily. Was it mainly just her incumbent strength, or the fact that there were no heavy contenders against her, or both?
That's interesting. She had 13 people running against her.
Right. And
in other cases, you only had 1 or 2 people running against either Mitch Landrieu or Mark Morial. Ray Nagin attracted a lot of opponents, but that became a nationalized election. In this particular case with Mayor Cantrell, she started to talk about her legacy, building a legacy. And she started it with how she handled the COVID situation in reducing the spread. Then infrastructure, and tying infrastructure not only to physical, but the need to help people with services programs and facilities. So it started to help her build her legacy, and it was going to be difficult. The thing about challenging an incumbent, unless voters are very frustrated, very angry, they want to throw that person out because they haven't been doing a good job, or they might be under some investigation. It's hard to be an incumbent.
yeah.
It's been 80 years since a mayor was denied a second term.
1946.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And so, that history was on the side of Mayor Cantrell, and that the money was behind her as well, that she raised more money than the rest of the field combined. And so basically, if people are putting their money on you, they must think that you're doing something right. They're probably looking at it as an investment. And that, no one with any kind of standing really decided to challenge her. She was left with a number of people who really didn't have a lot of experience either in the business world or the political world. And they basically ended up just being sacrificial lambs in the end. And so it was kind of unusual to see so many, because that's typically what you would see if you think the incumbent is relatively weak. When they have the incumbency factor, it affects how people think on whether to challenge you or not. And the fact that there were 13 people, I guess these people, they figured that she was weak as a result of COVID, people being upset with her decisions on shutting the city down and reducing the transfer of the virus. So it was kind of unique, but in the end, she just crushed everyone.
Yeah, definitely crushed everyone. And last night she was, I was at the watch party. She was extremely happy to get it done last night for sure. Okay, so let's talk about this council at large race. We'll start with Division 2, the late victory that wasn't expected by the winner last night. J.P. Morrell, he called it quits. He went home, said, we can catch up in the morning, and it turns out he won outright.
Yeah, we were, kind of crunching the numbers here late at night, and, we had him above 50%, and all of a sudden he comes on and he says, well, it looks like there's going to be a runoff. And so we assumed that his team had some numbers that we just weren't aware of. But it seemed like, he had caught momentum at the end of the campaign. He was picking up a number of endorsements from some big names and some, groups and entities. And so I kind of thought that he would be able to pull it off. And if it would have went to a runoff, he would have been the favorite. But it was kind of interesting. We had to wait for early vote to come in after the election day vote came in. And so we were kind of wondering if he was going to be able to do it. And of course he was.
Now, another point about J.P. Morrell, it was sort of like a snowball effect. And he started slowly gaining momentum, and he constantly built on that momentum, from endorsements to other endorsements, and
the ads.
And it never stopped. And it was a good strategy, because once he started to build that momentum, it only accelerated and attracted others. Now, the other thing that made this race, Division 2, unique, you had this unusual alliance between former council member Jared Brissett and Kristen Palmer. Then Jared Brissett suspends his campaign. So it was like a soapbox opera to drama to some degree, but at the same time, JP was good at building that snowball effect.
Many wondered should the Councilman Jared Brissett have withdrawn from the race instead of just suspending the campaign, with that 11% that I believe he finished with last night would have made a difference for Palmer.
I broke the vote down by council district, and one of the worst performing districts was in District D, and that's where actually Brissett got 14% of the vote.
14, yeah.
And so I wondered if in fact decided that he was cannibalizing votes from her rather than taking votes away from JP. So, I think the whole thing just, blew up in their faces, after, after of course the event where Brissett is arrested, and then it was just kind of a strange dynamic, because you normally don't endorse another candidate. I mean, does that mean you're going to vote for that other candidate when you show up at the polls?
Right.
It really didn't make a lot of sense, but in the end, I think it hurt her more than J.P. Morrell.
And when voters do not understand the strategy, they tend to oppose it or not support it, and that's what you saw here. It was the first time they didn't understand what was going on. Everybody was scratching their heads, and that's why it didn't benefit neither one.
Yeah. All right, and let's also talk about Division 1. There's not much more to say about it.
What else can you say?
Elena Moreno had no problem securing her seat last night.
Yeah, that would. That's as dominant a contest as you're ever probably going to see. 85% of the vote. I don't think I've ever seen any election.
The closest was not Miss Parish, New Norman, I think, or Harry Lee one time.
Like
they had 89, 90%.
That's huge.
And believe me, that doesn't happen often.
Yeah. Also, Joe Giarrusso, he won his election easily last
Yes.
night as well in District A, so congratulations to him. But we're seeing a shaking of the table right now, possibly in the next coming weeks with these districts. Runoff between Councilman Jay Banks and this newcomer in politics, Leslie Harris. This race had some attack ads. Do you think that that influenced the results we saw last night?
Yeah, without a doubt. You know what was interesting too? What Ida did was not only accelerate frustration, but pre-Ida, Entergy was not a topic of conversation. Yeah, people might complain here and there. Post-Ida, Entergy became a topic of conversation and focus in the campaign. So that's the interesting thing here, and due to the fact that Jay Banks represents District B, Entergy took a lot of focus away from him, and in other council races too. But the focus is on Jay Banks, and you have two races, B and E, where incumbents are in a runoff. Incumbents don't really like to be in a runoff,
Right.
because it really puts them on the defensive. It's time consuming, it is expensive, and consider the fact that this runoff is 2 weeks before Christmas. Guess what voters are thinking about?
Yeah, they're not thinking about it.
Not the election.
For sure. Yeah, well, let's skip to District E with Councilwoman Cindy Nguyen. She's in this fight with this former councilman, Oliver Thomas. This district has been yearning for development for a long time. Do you think that they've reached frustrations with the incumbent and just willing to give a former councilman a second chance at this point?
Certainly they're frustrated out there, and it showed in the numbers that anytime an incumbent is at or near 40% in a primary election, that's a red flag that people are unhappy with your performance and that they may be looking at an alternative. And Oliver Thomas is an attractive alternative because he has the experience. He knows what it's like to be on the city council, both at large and as a representative of the district. And he feels that he can be a better spokesperson for that district than she can on the council, that he can basically move the council in a direction that he wants, and that he doesn't feel that she can do that for the district.
The other reality about Oliver Thomas is that he has never disappeared from public view,
Right.
being involved in the community. So that enhanced not only his visibility, but his relatability to voters. And that's what you saw in terms of the outcome. He was a known entity in politics, and therefore, by running for councilperson of District E, he was able just to capitalize on the built-in political capital that he had.
Yeah, because he still has a lot of those former supporters are still in that district.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we can go back to District C and D, the runoff between Freddie King III and former city attorney Stephanie Bridges. 7 people total in that race. Talk about your thoughts on that one.
Well, I think Freddie King has the distinct advantage. Particularly, he did very well on the West Bank, and so I think that he was at 44% going into the primary, so he just needs a few more percentage points. He's got the backing of some big names, Troy Carter for one, right? And so that puts him in touch with fundraising resources that he can use, to further his campaign. So he's got a much shorter distance to 50% plus one than does Stephanie Bridges.
You bring up something, I'm a West Banker, and I couldn't help but notice the amount of people on his team campaigning every day along, right before you get on that bridge. I think that made a big difference for him as well.
But here's another reality in terms of Hurricane Ida and its impact on campaigns. Usually, when you have a runoff, that's an intermission. And in this particular case, we think of resetting a campaign. That may not apply here because these candidates, they have some momentum, they have some resources. So I don't think it's going to be an intermission. They will continue to aggressively campaign, given the fact that voters are in a different frame of mind, different psyche, and you cannot afford to take your foot off the pedal.
Okay, let's go to District D, Eugene Green, whose name has been on a few ballots throughout the years, and a younger newcomer, Troy Glover. Let's talk about that.
Well, I'm going to be honest here and say that Troy is my sentimental favorite because he is a graduate of the University of New Orleans and he's a former student of mine.
Aha. Okay, so you taught him a little bit of what he
Yes,
knows
so
right now.
hopefully he's taken what I've taught him and he can use it to win elections. So, but he's pretty well behind, so he's got a long way to catch up. Eugene Green, name recognition, money, and so that's going to give him the advantage. But I'm going to be pulling for Troy in this.
Okay, what
But
about you, Dr.?
we'll see where the momentum goes. Eugene is a seasoned campaigner, short campaign period too. So we'll see if that benefits Troy or Eugene. Here again, you cannot afford to take anything for granted.
Right. Yeah. Which brings me to this next race, this Orleans Sheriff's race. Do you think that several months ago, the fourth-term sheriff would have imagined being in a runoff with a first-time candidate?
I don't think that
No.
Marlon Gusman imagined that he would be in a runoff. They seemed to be going into the campaign fairly confident that they were going to avoid the runoff, but it didn't happen. A lot of people, myself included, have underestimated Susan Hudson. She seems to have some backing from some of these Pack for Justice type groups, these progressive groups who are looking to reform the criminal justice system. And so that message seems to be resonating, and she did much better than I had anticipated.
It looks like at this point, Sheriff Gusman must reset his campaign in terms of messaging and communication with voters. Certainly, that was not an office that attracts a lot of attention, but I think he got caught up, that campaign in particular, not just his campaign, with the progressive movement that many people have talked about in reference to criminal justice reform. And we have to see what impact that will continue to have and how Sheriff Gusman unpacks it and is able to regain some of the support that he had in the past.
Yeah,
he was close, but in an election, close doesn't win.
And in a short amount of time, he has to switch gears on the messaging, especially with what you said as far as the pickup on reform, conversations about reform. And he's dealing with a really experienced police monitor in this race. So that's going to be something to look at. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of other races. Criminal District Court race going into a runoff, Austin Badon and Darren Lombard. Did you anticipate that runoff there?
Yeah, I did. Certainly, Austin Badon, he's clerk of First City Court, and Darren Lombard, of course, clerk of Second City Court. And Darren Lombard has experience in the clerk of criminal court's office. He was a deputy clerk, and so that's what he argues he can bring, is that experience to the job. Whereas Austin says, look, I've modernized and I've reformed and the First City Court, and this is what I want to do with the clerk of criminal courts, because it certainly needs to be updated and modernized. And so that's going to be his selling point, is that he's the person to do that.
And it was also a strong selling point of the other contender, Dr. Robinson. So in this particular case, you have the battle of the clerks, both with an elected office, how they decide to distinguish themselves, because they are of the same party, pretty much the same philosophies. They want to change and modernize the office. How one will distinguish the other one is going to be very interesting in this short amount of time.
For sure. Okay, we'll quickly mention these. Earl G. Williams, he remains the parish tax assessor after last night, and there's also a new state representative for the 102nd District, Democrat Delisha Boyd. Now, you talked about, well, let's talk about how you think this runoff will end towards in December. Are we looking at a change when it comes to a lot of the cultural things that voters are used to here in New Orleans, if we get the shake of the table with these council races?
For me, I think if Oliver Thomas is elected, I think that could lead to kind of a fundamental shift in terms of how the city council responds to the mayor. Oliver Thomas believes in what he calls a strong city council. When we look at models of city government, we typically think of the mayor model with the strong mayor, weak mayor. But he believes in this strong council, that he feels that the mayor tells the council to jump and they ask how high. And he says that's not how it's supposed to work. So I think he wants to change the dynamic. So that's what I would be looking for in terms of if he gets in, that he's going to basically kind of force the issue in terms of making the city council more aggressive and putting some of the brakes on Mayor Cantrell.
You know, the reality is that the table is already trembling
Yeah, you're right.
in reference to who will be on the council. And for the mayor, this is going to be very interesting. The relationship of the mayor and this new city council, who will want to establish their own identity, their independence, their perceptions of accountability. So this is going to be a very interesting second term for the mayor, as well as for this new council that's coming in.
Yeah, and her work starts tomorrow. She's probably in D.C. right now. She said she
Yes.
planned on being there in the White House when President Biden signs this infrastructure bill. And then we get the new news about Mitch Landrieu being an essential part of this infrastructure bill, just announced earlier this evening. The President Biden is tagging him as one of the leaders of seeing this thing through. What were you about to say?
Well, I think that's good news for New Orleans, and I'm hoping that the mayor is out there making the compelling case that, hey, we need significant resources. I mean, we're talking $1.2 trillion. Even if she can bring some, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to the city in terms of infrastructure, in terms of, say, rebuilding New Orleans East, expanding the port. I think that should be her main focus going forward, is bringing those resources back, because they're there, and if she doesn't grab them, some other mayor of another city is.
Sure.
And the reality with the infrastructure is that it's not one-dimensional. We have to talk about human infrastructure as well as physical infrastructure, services for people to enhance not only the progress of the city, but the sense of civility and being a part of the community that many people feel left out about.
Absolutely. So see if we can get some more unity and some cohesiveness
Yes.
going
Absolutely.
into this new year. All right, Dr. Silas Lee, Dr. Ed Chervenak, thank you for joining us and always contributing to our Commitment 2021 coverage and years on from here. So, of course, we have all these results online on WDSU.com. Orleans Parish residents, make sure to stay engaged in this process. You have another election to vote for, runoff. That is Saturday, December 11th. Make sure to go vote. All the content that we've had over the last couple of months regarding Commitment 2021, it's on WDSU.com. We'll be right back.